DeAndre Hopkins finally decided to speak up. And when he did, there was no filter, no sugarcoating, and definitely no rehearsed lines. He said exactly how he felt playing for the Ravens, what he expected from the season, and why. Despite being ready and able to help, the ball suddenly stopped coming his way. This isn't gossip or locker room rumor. These are Hopkins' own words, said without worrying about who might be uncomfortable. And what makes this even more interesting is that this story isn't just about box scores or raw stats. It's about decisions. It's about offensive choices and a feeling that kept building week after week. Some of the things he revealed completely change how you look at what was really happening behind the scenes in Baltimore. And as the details come out, it's hard not to wonder how different this season could have been. Now, picture this. You're stepping onto the field knowing you still have plenty left, knowing you can still help win games. But the opportunity just never comes. That's exactly how DeAndre Hopkins described his time with the Ravens. He made it clear he felt good physically, confident, and ready to produce more than he actually did. In his mind, this wasn't the end of the road. It was supposed to be the start of something much bigger. Early on, it looked like that's where things were headed. Hopkins scored touchdowns his first 2 games, showed clear chemistry with Lamar Jackson, and sent a strong message that he could still be an important piece of the offense. Nothing felt forced or lucky. When the ball came his way, he delivered. That only strengthened the feeling that there was a clear path for him to stay involved all season long. But as the weeks went by, everything changed. The ball stopped coming his way. His opportunities shrank. And Hopkins started to feel like he was being pushed to the side, not because of effort, not because of mistakes, but because of the scheme. He pointed directly to the Ravens' offense, especially under Todd Monken, saying he simply wasn't being used the way he could have been. And that's where the story gets even more compelling. While Hopkins felt underused, Baltimore's offense was clearly choosing its main characters. Those choices directly shaped how targets were handed out. And the gap between who got chances and who didn't helps explain why that frustration kept growing as the season went on. What's wild is that nothing early on suggested Hopkins would fade into the background. Right out of the gate, he scored a touchdown. Then he did it again the next game. He showed he still knew exactly how to get open and make plays. This didn't look like a veteran at the end of his career trying to fit in. It looked like a player ready to contribute right now. Those early games naturally raised expectations. When an experienced receiver starts hot like that, the logic is simple. Confidence builds, volume increases, and the offense leans on him in big moments. But in Baltimore, that never happened. Those 2 early touchdowns ended up being the only ones he scored all season. Slowly, Hopkins started disappearing from the game plan. Not suddenly, but quietly. Fewer routes designed for him. Fewer balls thrown his way. Less involvement when the game was on the line. It felt like the offense just moved on without him, even though he was still there, still ready. And this wasn't just a feeling. It shows up in the numbers, on film, and even in Hopkins' own words. At that point, it becomes impossible not to look at the rest of the offense and ask the obvious question. If Hopkins was producing when targeted, why did other options end up getting almost all the attention? Hopkins has never hidden the kind of player he believes he is. He sees himself as someone who needs to be on the field in big moments. Third downs, crucial plays, tight finishes. It doesn't matter who else is out there. That mindset didn't change just because he put on a Ravens jersey. And yes, the offense had other important names. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Isaiah Likely. Hopkins acknowledged that without hesitation. But for him, sharing the field doesn't mean accepting invisibility. In the mind of a true competitor, there's always room to make an impact. At the core of it all, Hopkins believed he could coexist with those players without taking anything away from them. It wasn't about pushing someone out. It was about expanding the offense. More weapons, more looks, more problems for opposing defenses. That was his vision. But reality looked very different. As Flowers took on more and more of the spotlight, the rest of the receivers, including Hopkins, were left with limited chances. And when the ball doesn't come your way, even the most confident player starts to feel the weight of those offensive decisions.
All right, we're already past the halfway point of this video, but before we continue, I noticed you haven't left a like yet. It's really important. because it helps YouTube keep showing you my content so I can keep bringing you the best news about the Baltimore Ravens. So go ahead and hit that like button. It's free and it really helps. Thanks. Now let's get back to it.
When you look at the stats, the picture becomes crystal clear. Zay Flowers was by far the main target in the passing game. He was thrown to 118 times, way more than any other receiver on the roster. That left very little room for a true balance in the offense. Hopkins, meanwhile, finished the season with just 39 targets. Even so, he put up 330 receiving yards, making him the second most productive receiver on the team in that category. In other words, even with limited volume, he delivered, and that only fuels the feeling that he could have done more if he'd been more involved. The most telling detail comes late in the season. When games get tighter and every possession matters, Hopkins completely vanished from the stat sheet. In 3 of the Ravens' final 5 regular season games, he didn't record a single catch. Those numbers show that his frustration didn't come out of nowhere. This wasn't just emotion or ego talking. It was a clear read of what was happening on the field. And still, the way he handled it says a lot about the kind of professional he is. Despite all of this, Hopkins made one thing very clear. He never let the situation become a locker room issue. As hard as it was to accept fewer opportunities, he continued supporting the teammates who were getting more snaps and more targets. He even said himself that he never felt like a bad teammate. Quite the opposite. He kept encouraging others, celebrating plays, and carrying himself like the experienced leader he is. That doesn't come naturally, especially for someone who's been a focal point of offenses his entire career. That attitude shows his frustration was competitive, not personal. He wanted to play more because he still believes he can help a team win. It wasn't pouting or a bruised ego. It was the mindset of a player who steps on the field expecting to make a difference. And when you put everything together, the strong start, the drop in usage, the numbers, and his professionalism, one question ties it all together. This isn't about whether DeAndre Hopkins could still produce. The real debate is whether the Ravens truly got everything they could out of what he still had to give. DeAndre Hopkins didn't speak out of impulse or bitterness. What he did was shine a light on decisions that quietly shaped the season and help explain why things didn't end the way many expected. The hot start, the sudden drop-off, and the silence and stat sheet late in the year paint a clear picture of a player who still believed he had more to offer. At the same time, this situation shows how scheme choices and opportunity distribution can define entire seasons and even careers. Baltimore committed to a certain direction, centered the offense around a few names, and left others on the sidelines, even when those players showed real impact whenever they were involved. Hopkins became the symbol of that choice, not because of a lack of talent, but because of a lack of usage. Now I want to hear from you. Did the Ravens make a mistake by not using DeAndre Hopkins more, or did prioritizing other targets make sense within their game plan? Drop your opinion in the comments, because this conversation doesn't end here, and your take is part of it.
And if you, just like me, are passionate about the world of football and want to learn more about the Ravens' legacy, don't leave this video without sharing it with that friend who is also a Baltimore Ravens fan and will love this content. See those video suggestions on your screen? The first one was handpicked just for you, and the other is a recommendation from YouTube itself.